Just preparing the live stream for YouTube. Here we go. Okay. So, good evening and welcome everyone to this ACLT webinar on the new gene editing therapy for sickle cell disorder. And I really would just want to thank you all for joining us. We hope you have an insightful uh, session exploring the new eras of this groundbreaking advancements in sickle cell disorder. This event will bring together and is bringing together leading experts, researchers, clinicians, patients, who we call warriors, donors, and healthcare professionals to discuss the latest innovations in Crispr, which is an acronym for clustered, regularly interspaced, short, Palindromic repeats. And it's a technology which allows the clinicians to alter the DNA, or scientists to alter the DNA of living organisms, and what it can do in terms of a potential curative cure for sickle cell disorder. Um, we're going to hopefully learn about this new technology, which is also known by the brand name Casgevy or XFL, which is the name that Vertex Pharmaceutical has given this particular brand of CRISPR, and it was recently approved by NICE, the National Institute of Health Excellence, in January of this year, 2025. However, this was only achieved after a near year-long public consultation and lobbying led by Sickle Cell Society, Anti-Nolan, and many other associated stakeholder organizations like the ACLT and the many sickle cell warriors out there, some of who are already on this particular forum, this webinar. Before we start, I just want to highlight this session is being recorded and is also being streamed on YouTube as we speak. I want to acknowledge and say thank you very much to uh, panelists who you're seeing on screen right now. Dr. Rachel Adu, consultant hematologist specializing in sickle cell disorder. Dr. Stephen Okoli, consultant hematologist and director of the Sickle Cell Alliance. Mr. Bangola, sickle cell warrior and long-term chair of the Sickle Cell Society. Mr. Anderson Masamba, who is a sickle cell warrior and a stem cell transplant recipient. We also have on board soon Mr. Olalu Baiki, who's an advocate for sickle cell disorder and blood donation awareness. Ms. Haley King, who is the founder of Sienna Smile Charity, named after her child, Sienna, a sickle cell warrior. Pastor Ian Sweeney from the Seventh-day Adventist Church and leading advocate on health issues. And Professor Mark Layton, the clinical director of Northwest London Sickle Cell and Thalassemia Network. And last but not least, Dr. Dale Sevier, consultant hematologist at Guy's and Thomas's Hospital. Thank you all of you for being here and to taking part in this webinar. And thank you to those of you who are logging on right now and joining us. Now, before I hand over to Dr. Rachel Adu to give us a presentation, just want to highlight that once again, this webinar is being recorded and is being streamed on YouTube. So if anyone is you want to get others to watch this, and they can't register in time, they can go to the ACLT YouTube channel. It's there live as we speak. So without further ado, may I hand over to Dr. Rachel Kefi-Adu, consultant hematologist at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital, to talk about sickle cell disorder, how it impacts patients, and the latest current therapies with its pros and cons and the challenges that are out there for patients. Rachel?
Excellent, thank you. So we've got some slides prepared, Dr. Okoli and I. So I'm going to do the first few slides on sickle cell, and then he'll do what Casgevy is. So I'm going to try and share slides now. Bear with me. I think I've done my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see those slides. Excellent. So as Orion said, my name is Rachel. I'm a consultant hematologist at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital. And together with King's, we look after probably the largest population of individuals with sickle cell. So what is sickle cell? It's an inherited condition. You need to have two parents who have mutated gene to donate to you to be able to have the condition. So the cartoon you're seeing on the screen is showing two parents whom are each carriers, and you can see for each child they have, there's a 1 in 4 chance that that child will have the sickle condition. So there's a child with sickle, there's a 50% chance they'll produce a child who's a carrier like them, and there's a 25% chance, a 1 in 4 chance that they have a child without the sickle condition. So how does sickle cause all the issues associated with it? It affects your blood. So blood is made up of two compartments, a cellular compartment and a liquid compartment. So the liquid part of blood, the reason why blood flows, is something called plasma. It's a liquid called plasma. And within plasma, you have cells, and there are 3 main groups of cells. There are white cells, which help fight infection. There are platelets, which help clot your blood when you cut yourself. And then there are red cells. And sickle affects the red cells. So red cells are the powerhouse of the 3 cell groups within blood. They are the powerhouse of the human body. These are the cells that travel to your lungs to collect oxygen and deliver it to your tissues. They're the cells that collect carbon dioxide from your tissues, deliver it back to your lungs. So they're what give you energy. And when you're anemic, it's because your red cell count is low. So that's what determines anemia. And anyone who's been anemic on this call will know that you feel very tired if you're anemic. Now, sickle cell affects the protein that resides within red cells to do all of the work, and that protein is called hemoglobin. So in someone without sickle cell, their hemoglobin are these little molecules that live within the red cells. They float freely in the red cell. So they go to the lung, they get oxygen, they go to the tissues, they deliver oxygen, pick up carbon dioxide. They're completely fine. They're floating around, no problem. But if you have sickle cell, then what happens is when your hemoglobin goes to the lungs, your red cells get to the lungs, your hemoglobin does exactly the same as someone without sickle. The problem is once your red cells get to the tissues and deliver the oxygen, then your hemoglobin has a tendency to start sticking to each other. When they do that, there's something called polymerization. So within the red cells, all those little molecules stick to each other, form these really rigid strands, which then leads to the red cells becoming these sharp and pointy things. So instead of being nice round cells like this, they become these sharp, pointy things, which damage blood vessels, have a shortened lifespan, and cause all of the problems we associated with the sickle condition. And this cartoon, again, is just trying to show you what that clumping within the tiny, tiny, tiny microvasculature within the human body can look like. So, sorry, I went a bit too fast. So the reality is, because sickle cell affects your blood, there is not an organ within the human body that cannot be affected by sickle. If you name me an organ, I can name you a sickle complication that can affect it. Doesn't mean that all sickling individuals with sickle will have all of these complications, but the potential to have them exists in everyone with sickle cell. And probably the most acute ones are stroke, which can be really quite devastating, and the fact that patients are chronically anemic and have to deal with these things we refer to as sickle cell crises, which are completely unpredictable episodes of acute pain, which can happen at any point without any trigger, but will also almost always be triggered if someone has an infection, becomes very dehydrated, or has other high stresses. And the reason why organ impairment in sickle cell matters is that we've got studies that show that if you have sickle cell and you develop more than one organ that is underperforming or is impaired, that impacts how long you're going to survive. So this is a study from a center in the US, and they basically just followed their sickle patients for a number of years. They didn't do anything. They literally just documented what happened. And they were able to show that at the start of the study, if you had more than one organ, and the organs they looked at were the heart, the kidney, and the lungs, if you had more than one organ that had an impairment, then 7 years later, you were less likely to be alive than those who had one or less organs impaired. So any organ impairment in sickle affects your survival. And what does survival in sickle look like? Up until the 2000s, and probably much later than that, the survival in sickle is generally thought to be into the 40s. All services will have patients who outlive that, obviously. But in South London, we had a look at our data. My colleague Kate Gardner did this work and showed that actually in a well-resourced setting where you have good care, then our patients were living into their 60s. So survival is improving, but 67 for a Black person really isn't that old. Black women live into their 80s. We expect to live into our 80s. It is one of the advantages of being a Black woman is you will live a long time. And if you're a Black woman with sickle cell, then you're looking to survive 20 years less than an ethnically matched colleague. So what do we do in the clinic for people with sickle cell? Not a huge amount, I have to say. So all women who get pregnant in the UK will be screened to see if they're at risk of producing a child with sickle cell. If they are at risk, their partner will also be screened, and then they'll be counseled for what the outcome can look like. If a child is born and is found to have sickle cell, and all children in the UK will be screened for this condition. If you're found to have sickle cell, you will be seen in a clinic before you're 3 months old. And the aim of that is to start you on penicillin because that saves lives. And then you will also be started on folic acid, which is a vitamin that helps you produce blood. And all children have something called transcranial Doppler screening because, as I said, stroke is one of the most devastating complications of sickle cell. And children with sickle cell have a 22-fold increased risk of stroke. So we screen for it and we put people on treatment, which is transfusions, if they are found to be at risk. And then the only tablets we have in the clinic to treat the condition is a drug called hydroxycarbamide, and I'll come back to that. And then you will be seen regularly through your childhood in the clinic. You will have something called a transition into adult care because you never disengage from medical care. So the pediatric team hand you over to us in the adult service, and in the adult service, we continue this process of looking after you. You will be seen at least once a year. Most people a lot more than once a year. We will monitor for complications that may occur and try and get treatment in to try and stop them from progressing. And obviously, when you are of an age, we will talk to you about your reproductive options. And we try very hard to encourage our patients not to marry other individuals with them or not to have children with other individuals with sickle cell. Right. So what treatments do we have? Now, whenever I put this slide up, I always try really hard not to be bitter about it. So the unique thing about sickle cell is it was described in Western literature in 1910. It's been known about in African literature for hundreds of years before that. We knew about the genetic basis of sickle cell in the 1950s. It was the first condition to have its molecular basis be delineated. We understood the genetics of this condition. It was like the prototype condition. We're now, I don't know, I think 115 years down from when sickle was described in Western literature. And these are the treatments we have in our clinic. Blood transfusion has been in use since the 1800s. Penicillin, discovered in 1928. Hydroxycarbamide, discovered in the 1800s, but has been used in clinical practice since the 1950s. And those truly are the three things we have in the clinic for most of our patients. And then for those with severe condition where we consider cure, then we look at something called a stem cell transplant. The standard for that in adults is you need a brother or sister who's a full match to be able to get that treatment. And less than 15% of our patients will have that. There is a clinical trial looking at less than full match related donors. So we know that stem cell treatments cure the condition. So it's really important that we have options that for those who don't have a fully matched brother or sister to also be able to access something that looks like a cure. So then just a bit about what we could all do. So for people with sickle, what the clinical community and what the patient community actually needs is for everyone to take part in clinical trials. We're here today talking about a treatment because individuals with sickle cell took part in a clinical trial, showed benefit of a new treatment, and that treatment is now available to the bigger community. So we all need to get a bit more proactive about taking part in clinical trials. And then what about the rest of us? Those without sickle, what can you do? Well, you can get educated about the condition. And obviously I'm preaching to the converted because you're on this call, but obviously let people around you know. But also you can become blood donors. And that is a lot of work that the ACLT does in our community to try and encourage us all to go and give blood, because that is something tangible you can do about the condition. This is the slide I stole from Stephen. And then my absolute, well, almost last slide is just again banging on a little bit about clinical trials. We would not be here this evening if there hadn't been a successful clinical trial showing that there is a treatment that offers the option of huge transformation to individuals with sickle without people taking part in clinical trials. So clinical trials are important. They help us understand new medicine. They help us understand the safety of new therapies, and they add to the scientific research and knowledge about conditions. Sickle has a high degree of unmet need. We lack treatments. Everyone can help in the world of sickle cell. We can all get educated. We can all donate blood. We do have some cure options now, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Okoli to talk to you about one of those.
Before Dr. Stephen Okoli starts, can I just highlight to everyone who's attending this webinar, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Where Dr. Dale Xavier and Professor Mark Layton can actually reply back to any of your technical questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A rather than the chat. Thanks so much. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you. So thanks, Rachel, for that very comprehensive lead-in. So I'm Stephen Okoli. I'm a sickle cell doctor based at Imperial and also the adult stem cell transplant lead at the Trust for sickle cell. Next slide, please. So, oh, we're missing one. So that's it. Thank you. So what I was hoping to do is really just to trying to think about the best way of presenting you all the information, as much information as I could in the time that I have about this new treatment available, as Orin has sort of quite eloquently sort of introduced us to. And I thought, as I do in my clinics, and I'm doing increasingly over the last few weeks, is to answer some questions. And these are questions that patients have asked me. So the first one is probably the most obvious. What is Casgevy? Thank you. So Casgevy or Exocel is a custom-made gene therapy product for sickle cell. As has been described, it uses CRISPR-Cas9 technology to modify the stem cell so that it produces an excess of fetal hemoglobin, significantly more than it would otherwise. And that is then transplanted into transplanted back into the patient's bone marrow. This has several impacts, several effects. Because you increase your fetal hemoglobin, you increase your overall hemoglobin. And as Rachel said, being anemic has a significant impact on patients. And what it also does, it reduces hemolysis, red cell breakdown, because by increasing fetal hemoglobin, which is a non-sickling hemoglobin, you can therefore reduce the impact of this polymerization that Rachel described to the red cell, and therefore the damage that the red cell will occur to the red cell. And the trials that were done in the early trials for Casgevy also showed a significant reduction, and I'll talk about that in the later slides, in painful crises. So the next slide, please. So what the product is doing is that it is trying to reduce the sorry, so I've got distracted by something. So this case is of a patient who was involved in the early stem cell trials, and this is their starting hemoglobin profile. So as you would expect, someone who's got HBSS, the predominant hemoglobin is hemoglobin S. And there is a small amount, which a lot of patients produce, a small amount of fetal hemoglobin, less than 10%. Next slide, please. After treatment, this patient has increased their fetal hemoglobin from about 9% to almost 45%. So the overall hemoglobin has increased significantly. But as you can see, that the HbS that depicted in purple has remained the same. And this is where a lot of sickle cell doctors struggle to describe, at least at this stage, this treatment as a cure, but more comfortable as a transformative therapy rather than a curative one, because there is still a significant amount of sickle hemoglobin residing in the red cell, and we're unclear as to the impact of that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next question is Casgevy available to all patients with sickle cell? The answer is next slide. The answer is no. About just under a month ago, we NICE commissioned Casgevy for the treatment of sickle cell, and as a consequence, there were some eligibility criteria that were linked to that. So they're listed, as you can see, being over 12 and above, having a number of at least 2 crises, severe crises, each year for the last 2 years. Sadly, as is often the case, unfortunately, only certain subtypes of sickle cell were included in that eligibility criteria, and quite notably, KPSC were excluded. And of course, this is a modified stem cell transplant, so the patient would need to be fit for a transplant, and we can go into that in a bit more detail in some of the later slides. And because the standard of care, as Rachel's alluded to, is a fully matched sibling transplant, and that's what the data, the true benefit is. If you do have a fully matched sibling who's willing to donate stem cells, then that should be the route that you take for a curative option. Next slide, please. So I often get asked about the journey, the Casgevy journey. Next slide. And that is not dissimilar to a standard stem cell transplant, with a few quite important differences, and I'll highlight them as I go along. First step is to decide that this is what is for you. Discuss it with your family, your friends. Think about it quite closely, and we've got some patients who have gone through transplants, and they can obviously talk to their experience. Meet the team. So what we tend to do, is we would refer, if you don't attend one of the authorized treatment centers, one of the centers that can deliver, 3 centers at the moment, hopefully it'll be 4 fairly soon, that can deliver this option, then you'll be referred to one of those centers and meet the transplanters, you meet the psychologist, you meet the fertility team, which is really important, and then you go from there. And then the process of assessment and optimization would happen. Step 2 is preparation for the stem cell collection. So to collect these stem cells from you, and that would involve at least 2, ideally 3 months of red cell exchanges. That has 2 effects: one, to prepare you for the transplant process, but also to prepare your stem cells so they can be collected and then the best conditions so that when the modification occurs, they're in the best state to be implanted. Next slide, please. The next step is the collection of the stem cells themselves. Patients will receive injections to stimulate the stem cells to move from the bone marrow into the bloodstream, where they can be collected on a special apheresis or stem cell collection machine. So this process doesn't involve any operations, no general anesthetics. The stem cells are collected from your bloodstream. Importantly, our patients often require multiple collection, and that can take several weeks. The next step, thank you, is the making of the Casgevy. Now, this is a long process. It takes several months, up to 6 months, where your stem cells are modified so that they produce excess of fetal hemoglobin when they're reimplanted. And importantly, this time is where you often need the most support. Having good contact with a psychologist and our transplant coordinator is really important to make sure that you remain motivated and the ultimate goal is kept in mind. Fertility, this is the point where the fertility preservation, which again, as I keep on coming back to that, I will touch on a bit more. That's really important, and that's how often happens at this stage. And then the fifth step, I think I probably need to move a bit quicker. The fifth step is the actual transplant itself. You're in hospital for about 6 to 8 weeks. You will receive intensive chemotherapy to clear your bone marrow of the residual stem cells and enable these new modified stem cells to move into the bone marrow and to grow and develop. That 6 to 8 week period is also the period that you need for recovery of stem cell function. So those stem cells that have been implanted, they need a bit of time to start to produce those cells that Rachel referred to, and that can take several weeks. Step 6 is the point at which you go home. It is certainly not the end of the journey. You will require several months, 12 to 18 months in many cases, of intensive follow-up when you come to the hospital for a variety of things. Next slide, please. So these slides have come from this web page. It's a very good web page generated by Vertex, the company that make the product. And I'd encourage those of you who are interested to go onto the website. There's a very nice video that's associated with it. The next slide is really just to talk about this post-transplant period, where you will have an indwelling line where you can have a blood test taken, transfusions if needed, and treatment of infections. The other important thing is the psychosocial support that we will continue to offer you, just so that you can see yourself through this really it transformed to quite challenging time. And medication. A lot of drugs. Those drugs will diminish as you get further away from the transplant, but they're all important. Next slide, please. So I'll talk on this very, very quickly, how this transplant differs from a more conventional transplant. Next slide, please. So just to focus on 3 things. The first is about the conditioning. So the preparative chemotherapy to prepare that bone marrow for the new stem cells. In the standard or conventional allogenics, so transplant where you receive stem cells from another person, the chemotherapy is less intensive. And as a consequence, the impact of that is less intensive. Unfortunately for Casgevy, because of the nature of the product, the chemotherapy is what we call myeloablative, so completely the most intensive chemotherapy that we can offer. So that does have impact on hair. So obviously hair loss will occur. and fertility will be impacted as well as other things. Next slide, please. What are the benefits? The benefits aren't entirely known at the moment. This slide tries to illustrate, so I'll try and orientate you. So this tries to illustrate some of the most important, the most important benefit that has been identified with this treatment, the reduction in severe painful crises. So on the left, so each of these lines, these horizontal lines of patients, it says 44 here, but then there's 46 patients that have gone through this therapy as part of the clinical trial. And the gray on the left is before they had the transplant, and then the green on the right is post-transplant. And then these diamonds, these blue diamonds are incidents. And in this case, it's severe painful crises. As you can see on the left-hand side, the incidence of crises are really quite substantial. And those reduce significantly post-transplant. And there's over 93% reduction in the incidence of vaso-occlusive crises post Casgevy therapy. Next slide, please. And this next slide is very similar to the last. These are, the diamonds are hospital admission. As you can see, the incidence of hospitalization due to severe painful crises fall off a cliff once patients have Casgevy therapy. So this stuff works. I guess the question is whether it has any significant impact on the chronic complications that we know all sickle cell patients unfortunately do end up developing. So this slide, if you can just click on as well. So this slide illustrates an important feature. The number of they've used a variety of measures to assess quality of life outcomes. So the impact of the disease, have sickle cell disorder, on the patient. And unsurprisingly, this treatment has a significant increase, a statistically significant increase in quality of life in disease after receiving therapy, which is really important. Next slide, please. So the next question is Casgevy safe? Next slide, please. So there were several things that the clinical trials made quite clear. The incidence of severe adverse effects were few. There were no deaths, no secondary cancer. I think, and one of the problems with some transplants is that the transplant can fail, and that didn't happen in any of the cases that were recorded. Now, one important thing is that none of the trials weren't designed to assess, as I alluded to, the long-term impact of Sickle and the long-term impact of this treatment on the effect of Sickle. So those are part of an ongoing clinical follow-up trial to try and assess that those particular problems. Importantly, also, because the treatment didn't include those patients with hemoglobin SC, we don't really have any data on that. And for a variety of reasons, patients with stroke weren't included. So that's also another feature. As Rachel alluded to, a very significant complication of sickle that hasn't really been assessed. I'm going to click through these really, really quickly. So transplant complications, infections, organ damage, either due to the pre-existing sickle complications or due to the treatment, this intensive chemotherapy cannot be ignored. We need to be really mindful of those. The psychosocial impact of transplant is also important, and the effect on fertility. Next slide, please. The risk of infections is greatest, or certain types of infections is greatest at the early stages, And that's when the patients are in hospital and closely monitored. But that monitoring needs to continue post-transplant, and patients have to take some precautions to ensure that they don't develop infections as a result. But as the immune system recovers and that improves, bacterial infections are the greatest risk, as I said, for the first sort of 30 to 45 days. Viral infections continue all the way through the process, and these we need to be really mindful of those. And then the last arrow up on the right just tries to illustrate the risk continues for over a year post-transplant. So we just need to be. So this is a. I guess what I'm trying to illustrate here is that this is a big commitment. The patients need to be fully engaged with and fully aware of before they make that decision to go ahead. Next slide, please. And because of the nature of the treatment, this conditioning, this intensive chemotherapy, there was significant risk associated with particularly those who have pre-existing lung damage, liver damage, particularly as a consequence of iron overload, and the impact on fertility, which is really important. Next slide. We ensure that all our patients meet with the assisted conception unit, and also we encourage them to preserve, undergo sort of fertility preservation in both women and men, because there's a high risk that your fertility will be significantly impacted by the disease. We're nearly there. Next slide. A few things, additional questions I just wanted to answer. I sort of alluded to the first one, whether the stem cell transplant involves an operation. Spelling mistakes, I apologize. And the answer is no. Stem cells are collected through the bloodstream through an apheresis machine. Following successful transplant, can you still pass on the sickle cell to your children? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. The only thing that's been modified are your stem cells. So the sperm and eggs can still pass on the sickle cell gene. And so the same precautions that you would if you hadn't undergo a transplant still need to be taken, even if you have received the transplant. Is there an upper age for this particular treatment? Technically, no. So the license doesn't suggest there is. But unfortunately, the way the trials were designed, there was an upper limit of 35 years. So for the time being, that's where most centers will cut off their patient recruitment. However, these things are taken on a case-to-case basis. So if you're over that age and you're still interested, I would certainly encourage you to speak to your sickle cell team about it. And again, apologies, another spelling mistake, but is there an upper limit to the patients that will be treated? And I know there was initial discussion, an initial suggestion that only about 50 patients will be treated. I think that's not the case. The real limitation is capacity. And at the moment, there are only 3 centers in London that are able to deliver this treatment. I know there's another one that's going to be online fairly soon. And hopefully we're to ramp up this option for more patients. And then finally on my list of additional questions is Casgevy a cure? And I've sort of alluded to this before. Because we don't have the long-term data associated with this treatment, and it is and because we don't reduce the amount of circulating sickle hemoglobin, then really the jury's out. We certainly do know, however, this is a transformative therapy. It transforms people's lives. So that certainly can't be ignored. But as to whether it's a cure, that is something we really need to think about. And then this is my final slide. My key message is that gene editing is a new and a very exciting treatment, and one that, for a select few patients, will transform their lives completely. There are risks, and particularly given the limited amount of long-term data we have with the treatment, we need to take steps in caution. The transplant journey is long and complicated. It requires commitment from patient and full knowledge of what they're letting themselves in for. We must ensure that this treatment is available to all eligible patients. There are very few centres in the UK that are able to deliver this treatment, and we don't want patients who don't live near one of the big centres not have access to this treatment. As Rachel alluded to, the treatment options for sickle cell patients at the moment are extremely limited. We need to do more for those patients who don't want or aren't eligible for this treatment to have better options to help them live with their disease. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen and Rachel, for giving us the overview of sickle cell disorder and to get a better understanding, and also to Stephen for very comprehensive, not over the top, not too technical, bringing it back to layperson's language of understanding this new therapy. I'm going to open up the panel discussion now, which we've called Living with Sickle Cell and the Battle, the Fight for Gene Therapy Access. And Stephen and Rachel, please join us. Dr. Sevier and Professor Mark Layton, who have been working behind the scenes answering some of the many questions which I can see on the Q&A. And please keep your questions coming in on the Q&A rather than the chat. But I'm going to now ask panelists, our sickle cell warriors, and everyone involved there to have an open discussion about this subject matter, as to how you've experienced living with sickle cell disorder, the emotional and physical impact of living with the disorder. What was Nike's decision that was made in January? What does it mean to you and to others who are looking for this curative therapy? And also taking into account the ethical and maybe religious connotations that might be linked to this. So, without further ado, I'm going to open with tonight and give us just a brief description, summary of your journey. And please, everyone on the panel, please join in. It's very much interactive for not only yourselves, but for those who are watching and listening.
Thank you, Oren, and thank you to Dr. Rachel and Dr. Stephen. My name is Ola. I'm 36. I live in London, on the outskirts of London. I have lived with sickle cell all my life. I was diagnosed at 11 months. I think there will be many of us in the not just in the panel, but within the wider audience that, have varied experiences with the condition. I've had good periods, I've had not so good periods, and it's not just impacted me, it's impacted my family. And I think that's often an element that's overlooked, is the wider impact on family, the guilt, the trauma that it can cause. And yet there remains hope. So I think this treatment represents hope for those that will participate in it. I am 36, so I'm above the the age cutoff currently in place. It's something I actually this Dr. Rachel is my clinician, so it's something I have mentioned in the past with her, but there are other treatments that can be explored. And I think I'm just elated that actually it's just another avenue for those with the condition to be afforded a better quality of life. So for me, yes, I can say it's a shame that I may not necessarily meet the criteria, but at least for those that potentially do get the opportunity, then it could definitely be transformative, as Dr. Stephen said. So yeah, that's my kind of 2 cents at the moment.
Okay. Can I ask ladies first? Haley, can you maybe
Yeah.
give us a viewpoint from your side of the fence?
So obviously I have two hats. I have being the founder of the charity that supports young people impacted by sickle cell, but also as a mother of a child that has sickle cell. Ola, I think you took the words out of my mouth. Is the first thing we appreciate so much is that feeling of hope. As Dr. Rachel said, there is such limitations on the treatments available. This is kind of long overdue in my eyes. And for those within the community, as a parent, I understand that there's feelings of anxiety and things when something new is available, and we almost, I don't know, feel anticipation in wanting to participate in those things, but giving that hope and that sense of an improved experience in life for someone like Sienna is obviously priceless in my eyes as a parent. I know there are very mixed feelings within the community, and this webinar, I hope, has put some sense of comfort in hearing exactly what the process is of the treatment and how people can benefit from it. And yeah, I just would like to say we really appreciate this opportunity for hearing from clinicians a bit more information and kind of busting all of the myths and the misinterpretations of what the treatment is actually about that has been presented within the community.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I look to Kai to say a few words? You're on mute.
Exactly as you said earlier, we should know these things. I'm Kai Bangbola, and I'm the author of the Lancet acclaimed Sickle Cell Guide with its encyclopedic knowledge on sickle cell. And I would say that the key message is that we're seeing a paradigm shift. You know, since the Nobel Prize in 1954 for molecular medicine, there's been no real progress. But this is really just the beginning. You're looking at one of the first stages of a new technology. There's also Livgenia, which is another treatment that's curative that's coming through. And anybody that has lived a life with sickle cell disorder, the pain and the suffering, to have an opportunity to see some of the luminaries that have received Casgevy, and since having it, summited Mount Kilimanjaro, which they couldn't have done before. The quality of life for them is tremendous. And although I'm far too old for it now, I hail the fact that youngsters coming through at the present time, 12 to 35, have access to it. There will be more trials. And through those greater trials, the expectation is that younger people will be able to get access to it. I mean, far better than all this hospitalization to be able to live a normal life. And then potentially, of course, older people, and 25% nearly of people living with sickle cell disorder have HBSC, so SC sickle cell. But the trials haven't been done as yet. Something like 74% have SS, and something like 4% have beta thalassemia sickle cell. So we do need to do more trials, but I want to assure everybody this is a young stage of the technology, and the expectation you can observe from what's happened with HIV. So in the 90s, HIV, you were expected to suffer or die. Now we've got prophylaxis for HIV, and what we're trying to do with these medications, and I would know because I was part of the authorization with the MHRA and fought for NICE to be able to get this approved. The expectation is that over time, there may indeed simply be an injection that will enable people to have elevated fetal hemoglobin, just as the graphs that you saw with Stephen Okoli. So hopefully that's a nice introduction from me.
Thank you very much, Kai. I really appreciate that. Can I ask Anderson to give us an insight into your unique journey as someone who's been a warrior as a sickle cell person, but also has seen the other side of the fence in terms of well, I'll let you tell your story.
Yeah, thank you, Oren. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Dr. Stephen Okoli and Dr. Mark Layton. Basically, I just wanted to share my story, I suppose, to everyone that's out there living with sickle cell, what my journey's been like, and also where I am today. So I was diagnosed with sickle cell at the age of 2. At that age, I was told, obviously, to stay warm and hydrated. Sickle cell later on in life, towards my teenage years and adult years, became a constant problem whereby I was being admitted. Whereby I was being admitted through, constantly being admitted through hospital, through random crises. It interrupted my school, university, and also work. The crises will usually occur in my lower back. I previously suffered as well from having jaundice in my eyes, acute chest crisis constantly. And the acute chest crisis sometimes led to pneumonia, of which I was put into hospital for a left collapsed lung, and the ITU unit, an ICT unit, ICU unit, 3 times at least in my life. Back then, I was given hydroxyurea, hydroxycarbamide, to help increase my fetal hemoglobin. Because at that time I was told to obviously take it to encourage my hemoglobin to increase, fetal hemoglobin to increase. For some it worked, for me though it didn't. And then from having that, I was advised to go on a 6-week exchange transfusion program, which at the time kept me out of hospital, and it did help. But the only problem came after that was I couldn't stay on it because the constant jabbing and the constant transfusions basically left my veins to be a little bit stiff, and that became a problem in itself. So after having further discussions with my consultant and my doctors at the Imperial College Healthcare, an opportunity came up for me to take part in clinical trials, randomized controlled trial selection process, whereby I received a haplo-identical stem cell transplant, which basically means it wasn't a fully matched transplant, but it was half-matched transplant. I'm fortunate to be the 3rd of 7 siblings, and amongst my siblings, 2 of them was a match, and my younger brother, stepped forward. Now, from his end, what that meant, as Dr. Stephen Okoli alluded to earlier on, was from his end, he basically just needed to take injections twice a day, approximately for a week, to help his body produce extra stem cells. Those stem cells were then harvested and collected in the system through a pheresis machine. And then that stem cell that he had was stored and cooled for later on. The process was fairly straightforward from his end. And from my end, I was admitted to hospital, whereby I received conditioning of my own stem cell, meaning they needed to get rid of my old stem cells in order and prep for my brother's new stem cells. So that process was quite intense because it involved total body radiation. I needed to have a Hickman line placed in my chest. I experienced I experienced fatigue and tiredness, loss of weight, high temperature, and loss of appetite. But once the stem cells from my brother was given to me, I slowly started to notice the difference. I started to feel much stronger. I started to feel my body. The best way I can put it is, I started to feel my body. It was as if it was almost someone gave me a new engine. But nonetheless, the whole process was quite intense, because during this whole time, I was in isolation at a particular ward. As I said, I was given conditioning, which meant I lost all my hair. And prior to the conditioning as well, I needed to discuss regarding reserving my fertility, and we need to have that discussion as well, which we did. Having come out from that, though, the whole entire process, I feel I'm in a position right now where, obviously, as you can see, my hair's back. I feel much stronger, and I can't recall the last time I had a sickle cell crisis. Now, bearing in mind, in full transparency, and when I was admitted in hospital May of 2024, and I was discharged around July 14th or 15th, it was. So it was during that time period where I was isolated and had this treatment. Post that time, difficult part was the constant medications that I was given, which I needed to monitor closely. I needed to get my weight back. I eventually got my appetite back as well. And I was closely monitored for something called GVHD, which is graft versus host disease. What that basically means is, my brother's stem cells that was given to me, they needed to closely monitor my body to see whether my own immune system will attack my brother's stem cells, which sometimes does occur. But fortunately for me, that never happened, because they did rigorous tests prior to me going into having the stem cells, not just for my brother, but also did rigorous tests for me as well to check my health. So fast forwarding from that time until now, I can honestly say it's been a transformative process. I feel much better, much stronger, and I'd like to encourage all those sickle cell warriors that's out there. You know, if you are consulting or discussing with your doctors, definitely talk about having a haplo-identical transplant to see if that's even an option, viable option for you. Because, you know, honestly, it's changed my life, like, completely, to be honest. I used to have, as I said, I used to have jaundice in my eyes. You just notice these subtle differences. I used to have jaundice in my eyes. The jaundice is gone. No more sickle cell crisis. I used to get lower back pain a lot. Don't get that no more. Yeah, I'll encourage anyone out there that's listening, basically, to explore your options. And also, regarding getting information as well, I think I'd like to also encourage everyone out there, wherever you are going to get your information, to look at trusted sources rather than, you know, the noise that's done on social media that occurs at times, you know. But that's my story.
Thank you so much, Anderson. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And yes, there is a lot of noise out there, which is why this event was put together, to try and cut through the noise. And I want to have another look at this one from an ethical, maybe religious point of view. And this is where I want to bring in Pastor Ian Sweeney, from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Pastor Ian, thank you very much for being part of tonight's event. You've heard a lot of information, technical information, but even more powerful, the personal story of the warriors on this panel. From an ethical, religious point of view, are there any barriers that you can see, anything that needs to be concerned about because of this new gene editing therapy that's there, which some people might have views as to that's maybe a step too far, overriding religious beliefs? I just want to open that question out to you.
Sure thing. Obviously, I can't speak for every faith tradition. Neither could I speak for every Christian tradition. But I think one of the great principles of, if you like, of all faiths, and certainly Christianity, is that it is always about seeking to relieve pain and about healing. And anything that is moving towards those steps, in my view, is always a good thing. Now, as far as the Seventh-day Adventist Church is concerned, we do run medical facilities, more primarily in North America, very large, as well as in across the African continent, and we are not frightened on research and developing things, even sometimes at much criticism from our own membership. But I think it's encouraging to see what is happening here. And hearing Anderson's story and hearing what has been shared, one thing I think I would encourage as well is that whatever we can do as part of a community in this current situation, like, for example, blood donation, is that something that is still required from the Black community? You know, I'm really proud that 2 of my 3 children, I'm proud of the 3rd one, but for medical reasons, he can't give blood. But you know, 2 of my 3 children regularly give blood. But you know, the way I hear some people talk about blood transfusion, you know, you think it's some kind of vampirism or something. You know, we've got to overcome these things, and I so much agree with Anderson. Let's stop the noise and to start doing something to help one another. We have people who are helping, but we've also got to help ourselves. And if we come together that way, I think great things can be achieved.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And can I kind of quickly ask Dale and Mark, you guys being in the background, and I can see there's quite a lot of questions coming your way, which you very you've answered in a very precise and concise manner. I just wonder, is there any particular questions that jump out at you might want to maybe just highlight for everyone that's on this call at the moment?
Yes, I can highlight a couple of questions. And firstly, thank you for inviting me to participate tonight. It's been a very illuminating and valuable experience. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. One from Stella about, is Casgevy the same process as having a BMT? So in principle, the answer to that is yes, it's a form of stem cell transplantation, but the big difference is that it uses the patient's own stem cells, and therefore there's no need for a donor. And also, touching on what Anderson said about the risk of the donor marrow reacting against the person who's received it, there's no risk of graft versus host disease with Casgevy. And there's probably very little risk of rejection as well, because it's the patient's own bone marrow cells. But I hope that answers Stella's question. And then a question from Laverne about what was the reason for hemoglobin SC not being accepted. And the answer, I think Kai touched on this, which is that patients with hemoglobin SC weren't included in the initial trials. However, there are plans for clinical trials of Casgevy in patients severely affected by hemoglobin SC. And in principle, there's no reason to believe that the treatment wouldn't work as effectively in hemoglobin SC as it does in other forms of sickle cell disease. I can go on and answer a few more of the Q&As.
Yes,
like, yeah. So the next one is from ED. is working, studying out of the question during the process was certainly for the period of the transplant procedure. It would be, but it is quite a lengthy procedure. But as Stephen mentioned, quite a significant part of that time is the manufacturing of the altered stem cells to make fetal hemoglobin. And the actual transplant process itself with Casgevy usually involves a period of about 4 weeks in hospital. There'd be more frequent visits to hospital in the run up to that, and certainly in the months immediately after that. So for a period of time, yes, working and studying probably is out of the question, but it's a relatively finite period. And hopefully with a successful outcome, obviously the capacity to undertake activities like education and work will be significantly better. And then there's a question from Calvin about raising expectations, essentially. And there's obviously been a lot in the media about the promise of Casgevy, but we've also heard some of the limitations or questions that are unanswered about its long-term effects, whether it really translates to a cure or not. And I think those are certainly issues that need to be highlighted in discussions between clinical teams and their patients when discussing this as a treatment option. So I think maybe I'll hand over to Dale to answer a few of the questions. But just to wrap up, I think it's worth mentioning a couple of things. One is that this is a technology that is now being used to treat a whole range of different medical conditions, ranging from infectious diseases such as HIV to other inherited diseases. Sickle cell and thalassemia are in the vanguard of that as having the only approved treatments that involve gene editing. And lastly, again, a point which Kai made, which is how well can this be scaled up given the millions of people affected by hemoglobinopathies and the fact that many of those are in resource poor environments. And I think there is significant progress being made towards a form of gene editing that can be delivered without the need for the transplant process itself, which is the intensive part of the treatment, which will involve delivery of the genetically altered stem cells, possibly in the form of an infusion like a blood transfusion, but without the conditioning factor that's currently required.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Mark Leighton. Dr. Del Sevilla, have you got any particular questions that jump out at you that you might want to share with us?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me as well to speak and answer some of these questions. It's been a very useful webinar to get the patient perspective and hear from the audience. So one of the questions is about how current treatments and drugs that increase fetal hemoglobin, how do they compare to gene therapy? So as Rachel said earlier on, hydroxycarbamide is the only current available treatment as a drug treatment that increases the fetal hemoglobin for people with sickle. I use hydroxycarbamide a lot in my clinic. I'm constantly speaking to patients about hydroxycarbamide because we've got a huge amount of data on hydroxycarbamide being very beneficial for patients with sickle. It reduces the amount of pain crisis. It reduces the number of times people need to come into hospital, reduces the chance of chest crisis. So it has very many benefits. But it's a drug that doesn't work in everyone, and it's like all drugs has side effects. These may include things like hair thinning, changes to the skin, monitoring of blood tests. So lots of side effects can potentially happen, and it doesn't work in everyone. So it's great that we have a new option. I would say, unlike hydroxycarbamide, gene therapy is likely to be only for a smaller subset of patients with very severe sickle, because the risks in gene therapy, I think, would be much higher than having a drug treatment like hydroxycarbamide. So there was a question earlier about how the process of gene therapy and stem cell transplant, where they're similar, and they're quite similar. Some people don't realize that gene therapy is almost like having a stem cell transplant. They're very intensive processes, and they do come with their own risks. So it's important that we educate our patients about that, and we make it quite clear that gene therapy won't be for everyone.
Thank you very much for that. Kai, can I bring you in briefly, and then I'm gonna go to a particular person who wants to ask a question. Kai.
Yeah, very briefly. The gene back in March 2017, the medical journals identified Bluebird Bio gene therapy, and that was a long time ago. And then subsequently, you've had Lindrick Holmes, 2019. He received it. He's been fine, no events. And people have to be monitored every 3 months. And that's part of the limited access at this point in time, but people will be monitored. So I wanted to give people some understanding that these new therapies are being taken very carefully. As regards Casgevy itself, Victoria Gray was the first person to have it 5 years ago. So there's 5 years worth of information already in the States, and there's been no adverse impacts. But you have to take a reality check. The balance on the development of these sorts of gene therapies has been 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But the ones that are now being approved and administered and used because they've been licensed have been very successful, and largely through that understanding of raising fetal hemoglobin. And I thought that gives a broader context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I've enabled Nicole Elliott to join us. Nicole, are you there? Because you wanted to say something. I'm just waiting to see if you can come through.
She put an apology in the chat. She didn't realize she had raised her hand.
Okay, no worries, no worries. I know there was actually someone else, but I'll find that person to see if they still wanted to say something directly to us. Now, Stephen, Rachel, and our warriors out there, where are we? I mean, as a layperson, I need to ask this question of all of you. Why was there so much of a struggle to get this passed by NICE? It was approved very quickly for beta thalassemia patients, and rightly so. But nearly a year and another consultation where all the major stakeholders and sickle cell warriors and stakeholders galore had to put in a real hard consultation lobbying to get it overturned. I'm throwing it out there. It's a hand grenade. I'm throwing it out there. Does anyone want to pick it up and run with this?
Okay, so I went to both the consultations, the thalassemia one and the sickle cell one. So another hat I wear is I'm chair of the UK Forum for Hemoglobin Disorders. So we are a group of clinicians as well as patient groups who focus on, just pushing forward what red cell disorders are. The difference between the two hearings. So one of the good things about this process through NICE is that both thalassemia and sickle went through the same NICE hearing group. So it wasn't like two different groups. Because believe it or not, the NICE groups are not the same. And they can be, what do you call them? Hawks and doves. They can be very different panels. But these two went through the same. The one thing I will say is the thalassemia one, it was easy math. You see, thalassemia patients come in for a blood transfusion at frequent intervals. it's quite easy math to say, this is how much thalassemia care costs in a year. This is how much Casgevy costs. And then they do the maths, and it's quite easy for them to pull that side of it together. So the economic argument was relatively easy with thalassemia. And then the patients who were on the call were also able to be very clear about how the condition affects them. And it just felt quite a straightforward one, but it did run on long. So the first disadvantage to the sickle hearing was that the thalassemia hearing should have finished at 1. It didn't finish till 4. So the sickle cell had 1 hour and then had to be punted to a different date. And then that date got punted again. Anyway, then we went to the hearing. And right from the bat, it just felt more difficult because the economic argument is not as easy to make. The sickle warriors in the call will tell you, sickle is very different. We have sickle patients in our clinic who come and see us once a year. And other than that once a year in clinic, they forget they have sickle cell. They just go about their lives. Their appointment comes on, they come to clinic, that's it. But I also have sickle patients in my clinic who had strokes at age, 18 months and are in hospital every 6 weeks. So trying to make the argument to the commissioners was much more difficult. And the point that they just didn't seem to understand was, it doesn't matter how good or bad your sickle is, you're still not going to live as long as your ethnically matched cohorts. It's a difficult disease. It's a severe disease. You have to think in those terms. And for health economists, I think that was just difficult to get their heads around it. But it is the one thing I will give props to this community for, because when that initial no came through, the responses that went through, it was impressive. Everyone who could write in wrote in, and that made a difference. And if you wrote in, I need you to believe that it made a massive difference. Because in the appeal hearing, one of the things they remarked on was the strength of feeling that came through from us about how important it was that this thing became available. In the UK forum, we put a response in that got multiply quoted because a slightly angry chair wrote the response and maybe was not as tactical and as polite as she could have been. But the point is, we got it over the line. All of us got it over the line. And we had to take some credit for that. I'll leave it there. So. That's my politically correct answer.
So. Thank you so much, Rachel, and people power. And it proves we can move mountains when we really try. And which is why myself and Beverly at ACLT and our team still have hope after nearly 30 years of raising awareness of stem cell blood and organ donation that we can still make a difference to like what happened here years later, getting nice to overturn it. It was people power, and we can, we want more people, our people, to go out and give blood and so on to help, especially those sickle cell warriors who need the well-matched blood. I'm going to quickly hand over to Stephen, because you got your hand up, and then I'm going to go to a young lady called Jenica, who's got a question.
So I'm slightly less diplomatic than Rachel. There were several things here. I think one, Rachel talks about the data about, some patients don't come to hospital that frequently. You see them once a year. This treatment is for severe. It's specifically labeled for those with severe disease. So by definition, these are people that have significant impacts on not only their clinically, but also psychologically and socially. So I think, to my mind, and I wasn't at the meeting, to my mind, this is a no-brainer. This treatment will save lives, and this treatment will offer people a normal life. So the quality of life will improve. And I think that's something I really struggled when I was speaking to various people who were at the meeting about the fact that the NICE committee didn't really understand what this impact the sickle has. That also means that we need to collect better data. I think we don't have the robust data to say that sickle, so someone with sickle, the impact clinically, psychologically, socially, we don't have that data, and that's data we need, because there will be new drugs, there'll be other drugs, and all going to be expensive. And what we don't want to be in a situation is when the next opportunity comes, we're scratching around to get our data. On a more positive note, I really love the organization. This is one of the things I find quite challenging, is that sometimes the sickle cell community can be a bit disparate. I'm glad that everyone organized and we all came out and said, actually, this decision can't stand as it is. And that was really, really encouraging. But I do see that there are some challenges we need to put. If we don't have this data, collect this data, then the next time this situation comes along, for a new drug we desperately need for sickle, we'll be in exactly the same place of fighting another battle.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Jenica, before I come to you, just Professor Mark Layton, you got your hand up before I go back.
Yeah, well, Stephen's made the point I was going to highlight as well, very, very, very well. The way NICE operates is that it applies a health economic argument to the decision on any new treatment, and without going into too much unnecessary detail about that, they use a metric called QALYs, quality adjusted life years, to assess any treatment, and if the cost of a treatment is in excess of £20,000 to £30,000 per quality adjusted life year gain, then the treatment has a much lesser chance of being approved. And I think it highlights Stephen's point about the need to have good health economic data that actually quantify the cost and impact of sickle cell disease, because this will come up again with other new treatments. There's several promising anti-sickling drugs currently undergoing clinical trial, and we'll face the same battle again unless we can provide better data.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Layton. Jenica Leah, I brought you into this because you've got your hand up, and I thought I'll give you the chance to say something or ask a question directly.
Hi, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for you guys for hosting this event and just giving everyone the information so that they're able to make informed decisions. I did put a question in the chat that hadn't been answered, and I would love if someone's able to give me some clarity on it, because the presentation and then some of the other answers have talked about the eligibility criteria and that it's only HBSS. Was that the NHS's decision after the back and forth that we had with them on it only being available for patients with SS and not SC, SB or any other types of sickle cell?
I could answer that question. Others may want to add to it. So the clinical trials didn't include patients with hemoglobin SC, so there wasn't any evidence on the effectiveness of the treatment in hemoglobin SC that could be presented. But there are clinical trials planned in hemoglobin SC, and those will be open in this country. So for patients with hemoglobin SC who would be interested in that, there may be the opportunity to participate in those trials.
So that's just in the because there are patients with HBSC and SB that I know for sure that have had it in other countries. So I'm wondering, is that just UK specific? That's the question I'm trying to answer.
No, so can I just jump in just to add that the SB thalassemias are included as part of from the eligibility perspective. It isn't just SSs, but as far as the NICE approval went, that was based on, in the first instance, the clinical trial data and subsequently the license. So what the license was based on the clinical trial, and the clinical trial included SS and S beta thalassemia patients. And that's where that information is going. As Professor Layton said, there are ongoing clinical trials, but unfortunately, as was often the case, unfortunately, SC patients have been excluded.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question, Jenica. I just want to highlight one or two comments that are being made in the Q&A and in the chat box, which I think summarizes some of the feelings of sickle cell warriors. It's from Calvin Campbell, who I'm sure many of you know from B Positive Choir and also NHSBT, a very strong advocate and a warrior of the highest kind. But he is rightly highlighting they don't see us as people of worth and never have. And he and others are very tired of having to beg, or the feeling of having to beg for everything that they get. And it's how are we going to get past this situation with the key stakeholders, which is now the NHS, in terms of treating sickle cell warriors as real people, especially when they interface needing treatment, blood transfusions, blood exchanges, and a lot. I thought I'd just again throw that grenade out there if anyone wants to pick it up and throw it back. Hi.
Hi, yes, I wanted to make an earlier point. There's another dimension to the NICE decision, and it's a political one. So having spoken about genomics globally and with politicians, there's a position where the country wants to be known as a medical superpower. And certainly in discussions with the MHRA, after we'd had the obvious discussions about the benefits for people living with sickle cell, and I live with sickle cell disorder, you have to realize that if you don't approve certain of these treatments, then companies will pull out of the country. And when you've got Switzerland, Italy, Germany, America, China, Japan providing such treatments, you don't want to go too low down that table. So plaudits to NICE. At the end of the day, we are where we are, and we've got a treatment that is available that really takes us from a really low league to the Premiership. Seriously, this is how serious this development is in terms of looking at the future. They've made the right decision, and it will generate a lot of national investment and international investment for the development of treatments, not only for sickle cell, but also for other peer conditions, whether that's haemophilia, whether it is, forgotten the name of it now, but you have to look at things again like HIV. There was a time in South Africa when 1,000 people were dying a day, and the medicines were very expensive, as we're talking about now. But we've moved on to a point where these treatments are available in developing countries. And that's the point that we will get to for sickle cell eventually, where these treatments are just more readily available and not so limited.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And just before I bring in Cafayette Tokes to say 1-2 words about her daughter and her journey, just to re-emphasize that Calvin's comments are his comments, but they do reflect a feeling out there on behalf of many patients who are going through the struggle as a sickle cell warrior. Tokes, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to ask your question. I know it's about your daughter.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, Orin. Hi, Dr. Rachel. My daughter's called Sapphire, and she was diagnosed at 2 weeks old because I'm a carrier. She was born in St. George's, so 2 weeks after she was born, we found out she had a full-blown sickle cell. She had a first crisis at 6. I live in Croydon, so she used to go to Croydon University Hospital. But one of the things is all the other, how do I put it, complications she had with her sickle, Croydon University wasn't able to, they didn't have the facilities to deal with it. We were often going to, what's it called, King's. In the end, she did her research. She's a little smarty pants. Ori knows her. She did her research and asked to be transferred to Evelina. And from Evelina, she transitioned over to Guy's and St. Thomas's under Dr. Rachel's team. And one of the things they found out then was she had something called pheochromocytoma, which they were treating her for. She has been on hydroxycarbamide since she was 10. Also, in 2022, I believe she was part of the Casgevy trial, which her body didn't take to during the second infusion. One of the things I fear for her is like, I mean, she's doing brilliant now. You know, she's gone to uni. She's got a job now where she can work from home, which is good. I still do mummy's taxi when she has to go into the office. One thing that I wanted to know is, with it being approved now, has there been improvement to the chemical component of the Casgevy? Is there anything else that she can have? Because it is, her mental health is really down a lot of times, and she's also been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So it's a lot.
Thank you for that. I'll allow Rachel, or any of the clinicians to quickly answer that. Thank you, Stokes.
Thank you.
So just two points. So it wasn't Casgevy she had a different treatment which is called crinziluzumab, which was in the clinic about 18 months ago. And it's not currently in the clinic anymore. She's definitely a candidate for Casgevy though, so we can talk about that in clinic. There isn't any sickle specific neurodiversity treatments, but there are neurodiversity approaches generally within the trusts that can be used for individuals with that diagnosis as well. But I'd actually put my hands up because of what Orin and Calvin are alluding to, which none of us are really saying, and I just thought I would say. Race matters in the world of sickle. Race does matter. It has impact, whether we like it to or not, it does. And it impacts lots of things in lots of different ways, and we just accept it and try and work around it, with it, and get above it. One of the good things that has happened in the NHS, though, is that recently resigned Chief of NHS England, Amanda Pritchard, when she started her post as the Chief of the NHS, one of the first hospitals she visited was North Mid, which had a young sickle chap who had died in hospital, having called an ambulance from his hospital bed. And that story struck her deep. So one of her main focuses in post has always been sickle. So since she's been in post, and since we've had the APPG report in sickle is actually quite high up on the agenda in the NHS now. And we've had a lot of things happen, which we don't have time to go into now, but lots of community work, lots of central trust work, lots of reorganization of how sickle care in the UK works, which is impacting how we look after our patients, and hopefully will result in improved survival and improved health for our patient cohort.
Thank you for that. And Stephen?
I also wanted to come back and just talk about the conversation you were having with Calvin. I agree wholeheartedly with what Rachel says. I think that the issue of structural racism is one that we need to face head on, and we need to call it out, because I think unless we speak of it, nothing's going to change. And I think that's one of the big things that, one of the things that I alluded to earlier, is that we need to be organized. I think part of the problem is that everyone sort of fights their battles in silos. And I think as we organize, we have a massive sickle population. Sickle affects our community it cuts quite deep. And I think we can't be, and I think this is the thing that's happened previously with sickle. It's very easy for us to be ignored when we're going as small groups. If we organize ourselves and go en masse and say that these things are unacceptable, we need more investment. And there is good data talking about the investment in cystic fibrosis, a disorder that affects Caucasian people. About a third of their population size is about a third of that of sickle. They have a significantly greater investment in research for new treatments for them than there is in sickle. Rachel talks about the All Parliamentary Group report, which calls it out. It calls out racism as an issue with sickle. So we need to go there armed with data that's irrefutable and say, actually, the current status quo is unacceptable. We need to do things differently.
Oren, can I quickly
I
just
look
say?
at yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I would encourage everybody to get involved, because the only way we will see change is, unfortunately, if there's data to prove that change needs to happen. So if people in the community see surveys, do it anonymously if you don't want to share your personal information. But whenever you see anything that will encourage change and hopefully give us a change that we want to see, please get involved, because when it comes to bigger corporations, data matters. And without the data, we can't prove that these changes need to happen. So please do, if you see anything that, whether it's charities or organizations, please do get involved.
Thank you. And to the attendees online who are still with us, please, thank you for hanging on. We are going over time, but I think this is such a rich event of information, clinical, anecdotal, lived experience that I think we need to just keep it going for a few more minutes. I'm looking to follow. How do you, knowing that because you're now of mature age, that you are past the point right now of being eligible? What would you say as an advocate, as a warrior, who are coming up, who are younger, who on the outside saying how sorry they are, but they can't make any difference? And what would you say to them?
Oh, that's a tough one. I wish I had the answers, but I guess it's just when I look back at my history and my experiences, I can definitely see the improvement in treatment generally, especially, I mean, since in the last 20 years, especially. When I moved to this country in 1997, I was 9 years old. I felt ill very quickly because we moved in with a family member that had chickenpox. I caught it, led to complications, and I ended up losing my spleen. And I can vividly remember having that surgery. And I've been left with a wonderful scar. And that type of surgery now is performed through keyhole. So even things like that, and then knowing that hydroxycarbamide was available, I went on hydroxycarbamide in my early 20s, which wasn't spoken to me about when I was younger. So I went on that, came off it, and I'm back on it. And then even becoming aware of other treatments like crizolizumab, which was previously available, which I also tried, and now this treatment, it shows that, a lot of treatment is being explored, is being brought to market. Yes, even if it's resisted at first, we are breaking through those barriers. And what I'm hopeful of, or I'm optimistic about, is that there'll be more treatments available in the future. So it's kind of just like, I don't know, just holding on and being hopeful that things will turn around. I do know in the moments it can be very difficult. Honestly, it can be incredibly difficult. I spent 45 days in hospital last year. So 2024 was not good. For me by any stretch of the imagination, but you have to kind of find your reason to just keep going. And even when you're having those moments, life can still be very beautiful. And it's just kind of keen into that and just knowing that things will get better. So I guess that's my message.
Thank you. A very profound message. Anderson, do you have any comments you want to make about this? Having gone through the whole cycle and come through to where you are now after a haplo stem cell transplant?
I just know how hard it is living with sickle cell. I totally get it. Like, we're not called warriors for no reason, It just kind of goes back to, I suppose, to what I said earlier on, or what everyone else, I suppose, mentioned. You gotta have something tangible, I suppose, to hold on to push through. There are options that are slowly becoming available. For me to get to this point, looking back in hindsight, I wouldn't have been able to get to this point if, you know, people didn't continue giving blood, because that's a massive and important thing as well. Because as I previously mentioned, I used to have blood transfusions constantly, which kept me out of hospital. But I'd say I think it's important just to continue having dialogue with your doctors and consultants about, you know, options that are available. Because I can only speak for myself, like at that time, you know, just constantly having blood transfusions, I just felt grounded. I felt like I couldn't up and leave, you know, or travel, etc. So I really wanted to know what my options were, and, you know, yeah, a haploidentical transplant option was available to me, and I took it. It wasn't easy, again, you know, not by a far stretch.
And more power to your siblings for stepping up, because that is not always the case, as many of us know. When a matched donor is found within the family, especially a sibling, not every sibling steps forward, and it is quite remarkable that happens. And so this situation where this new therapy is being offered to sickle cell warriors who are eligible but don't have a donor. Sometimes that situation of not having a donor is because the matching donor sibling has said no. And we need to really educate our own families about this, of being there for each other, whether it be as a stem cell donor, matching stem cell donor, as a potential organ donor, because tissue type becomes a factor there as well. Also, blood donations, as we know, in terms of blood groups, especially RO, we need to work within our own communities, our own families, to really make a difference, as well as the new technology that we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right, let me quickly come to you.
So were you talking to me, Oren?
Yeah, you got your hand up still.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, so the racialization in medicine is something that's long known. So you can encapsulate this through history. And that's the reason why the Sickle Cell Society led the parliamentary inquiry following the death of Evan Nathan Smith, where the coroner's prevention of future deaths report was very clear. Evan's death was totally preventable, and it was as a lack of poor care and compassion. Evan dialed 999 from his hospital bed, and there are others that have been in that situation, and it's been ongoing in terms of deaths. But we need to also understand that misogynoir is a problem as well, which is why you're 4 times more likely to die in childbirth as a woman. So when you look at the history, you've got the Black Report in 1980, the Aitchison Report in 1997, the Marmot Report in 2010, Marmot's second report 2020. All of those reports are very, very clear that there's racism in medicine. So it's a long historic thing, goes way beyond. It's why President Nixon brought in a law, which was the Sickle Cell Act, and that is one of the reasons why there's a lot more research in sickle cell in the States that has helped to try and create a level playing field, which I've written about in the Guardian newspaper and other medical journals. So I know a lot about the subject, but it's going to take a huge amount of effort to keep resolving these things. A lot of talking, as was said earlier. If you want a stark disparity, you would look at it empirically as why is it that cystic fibrosis has 512 treatments now, a new one yesterday, and sickle cell has only 4 treatments. Yet sickle cell was the first treatment that won the Nobel Prize in 1954. So it's evident. This is never about pulling anyone else down, but what we say in parliamentary circles, it's about saying, what about us? We need to level up. And this pulls us right back to where we are today, because this treatment takes us into a Premier League, and we have to keep pushing for the development of these sorts of treatments until they become affordable for everyone. And that's the goal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. And just before I wrap things up, I just want to quickly go to Pastor Ian Sweeney to, on top of what Kylie just said in terms of we're now, the chances are better for this new curative therapy putting us into the Premier League. How can the religious belief, whether it be Christian or otherwise, how can they assist in keeping us there and taking us to a higher plane?
Yeah, I think, we often use the word community, and we have lots of different communities and lots of different faith communities. I honestly believe that community works best when it comes together and actually does something active together. And whether that be protesting or petitioning or giving blood or being a donor, that to me is really what community is about, and it really shows that we care for each other. And I would hope that whatever faith, however we disagree on different things, preservation of life, the sanctity of life is precious to us all, and we should do everything we can to assist and to help alleviate and to make better quality of life for other people in the various and different ways that we can.
Thank you so much, Ian. And so, penultimate point we've reached now, to our panelists, any final words before I wrap things up? I look to our clinicians, I look to our warriors, I open it up for final words on this before we close what's been a very useful, helpful webinar.
I'd just like to say thank you to you and Beverly and your organization for organizing this. You did this during COVID as well. It was incredibly useful and helpful then. And again, it's been exactly the same. So thank you for taking the time, organizing it, getting us together. It matters. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I echo that and also say that these sort of events where we give people the facts are really, really important. I also would just want to highlight Anderson's story and say that though this is a new shiny option, the haploidentical transplant for the vast majority of people is the best curative option available to them if they don't have a fully matched sibling. So it's great that we've got this option for those patients that isn't an option, but we already have treatments, curative treatments that have years of experience behind them that we can offer patients. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to talk to their clinical team about what we could offer you. Thank you.
Any final words, Professor Layton, Dr. Sevier, any final observations?
Well, again, thank you for letting me participate in the discussion today. I just wanted to answer one question that was raised in the Q&A, which I think will be of a wider interest, which was a concern that Casgevy might follow in the footsteps of some of the other treatments that have been approved for sickle cell and then withdrawn. And to give what reassurance I can from a clinical perspective that I think unless there are safety concerns that we're not aware of at the moment, that's highly unlikely, because the results are so much better than they were for either voxelotor or crizanlizumab, with 97% of patients being crisis-free in the 12 months after their treatment. So I think that's something we don't need to worry about with this promising new treatment.
Right. Thank you very much. Dale?
There's a lot of questions in the chat, and I wasn't able to answer all of them.
It's okay.
But
Brilliant. Thank you.
hopefully you've got most of the gist around the nuances around gene therapy, the importance of participating in clinical trials, blood donation. Certainly for me, it was very interesting to hear the patient side of things.
Appreciate it. And Hayley, any final words from yourself and Sienna Smile?
Just thank you for these opportunities. Just the clarification that you were able to provide to the community is really beneficial. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. And again, to Kai, Olalu, Anderson, any final words before I wrap this up and say goodnight to everyone?
Yeah, I just wanted to give yourself a massive thanks for organising this, yourself and Beverly as well, and to amazing panelists that's here. To all my sickle cell warriors that's out there, you know, be of good cheer, be courageous. There are answers on the horizon, and just keep pressing on, you know. As a recipient of a stem cell transplant, I haven't had a sickle cell crisis in over, I'd say maybe 6-7 months or so. And at the moment, my health is in a good trajectory, you know, to move in the right direction. So again, thanks again, Orin and Beverly for this event.
Yeah, thank you to you all. I just echo those sentiments. Thank you again. This has been enlightening. Just even for me to have a better understanding of the treatment, and I can even talk to other people about it in my, you know, in my sphere of influence. So that has been incredible. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you to the medical team as well for just persevering and really advocating and fighting for us with all the stakeholders, and just keep championing you know, this good cause to improve people's health that do suffer from sickle cell.
And Rachel, would you like to go next, and then I can follow on?
I've said my bit. It was the thanks. Yeah.
So, I would echo and thank you for inviting me, Orin and Beverly, and ACLT. Besides drinking lots of water and being a person living with sickle cell, I understand one of the best things to have is someone to watch you back when you're really unwell. But what we want to take from this is certainly the points that have been made all round, especially by Anderson. We must encourage people to move forward with these treatments, because that's how we get the development, when we get the data, see how it works. But at the same time as encouraging people to move forward with these treatments, we just have to understand that we are in a far better place. The future has arrived to an extent. Get the best advice, as Anderson said, from those that are leaders that really understand the subject. That's the best thing that anybody that follows the guidance of wanting to do this can do. But I would encourage people to do it, look into the different treatments, get good advice, talk to people that know.
Thank you so much. And so as we come to the end of this webinar, I just really want to thank you all on the panel. Really appreciate you giving up your time and being so proactive and insightful, and personally and professionally on this webinar. To those who attended online, I hope you found it of enlightenment, empowerment. Hopefully it inspired and motivated you to understand and appreciate where we are and what the options are going forward, and how you as personal liberators can go forward for yourselves and also for many others who need to know the facts. And I really want to say that thank you to everyone from the ACLT point of view, to Vertex Pharmaceuticals, the Sickle Cell Society, and actually to leading the charge to enable us all to work together to get over the line with NICE. Really wanted to say that. And to all those who've asked questions in either the chat box, which we opened up, and also on the Q&A, really just want to say thank you for your questions, your insightful questions. And to go forward and trying to make a difference one by one within the church, within the community, in your professions. Encourage others to get engaged, to cut out the noise, especially that's there right now on social media, and get to the facts as Kai highlighted. So really just want to say on that light, and in fact, I'm just going to ask my better half, Beverly, if she wants to say one or two words before we close. Beverly? 'Cause I know you're online.
Hi everyone, sorry. It's been a bit of a tricky day for me today. I had to go to a funeral. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming today. The panelists, you guys, you've been absolutely awesome. I was driving and listening to everything that was being said. I hope our listeners got something out of this. And if you've got any more questions, just get in touch with ACLT, info@aclt.org. I'm sure if you've got any questions, we can ask our panelists and we'll come back to you with your answers. But thank you so much. Thank you. And hopefully we'll see you soon.
All right. All the best, everyone, and have a good evening. And this is a recording you will find on ACLT's YouTube channel. So feel free to use it and forward it on to others. Thank you and have a good evening.
Are we staying on?